There are a lot of reasons why we should do AI evals. For many companies, doing AI evals is the way to build the feedback loop into the product development lifecycle. So it's like your compass. We're using AI evals as a compass to guide product development and also product iteration. And in some of the regulated industries, for example, like education, the industry I'm in, evaluations are very important for us because we're also using it to check whether we're compliant with regulations.
That was Stella Liu, AI Evals practitioner and researcher, head of applied science at ASU and co-creator of the AI Evals and Analytics Playbooks course on Maven, on moving past vibe checks towards a more rigorous science of AI evaluation. Stella and I recently caught up with Eddie Landersberg, staff data scientist at Google and causal AI guru, about the past, present, and future of AI evals.
Once you move along the maturity and scale axis, it starts to look a little bit more like a data science problem. Data science, it's like a multidisciplinary area. And so I think that as this matures, we realize more and more, and a lot of what my work is about, bringing kind of statistics and causal inference to AI evaluation, is that as this kind of field matures, we realize that, hey, this is just policy evaluation. This is something that we've been doing for hundreds of years.
In this episode, Stella, Eddie, and I explore why AI evaluation is fundamentally a team sport, requiring tight alignment between product managers, engineers, and domain experts to build true user trust. We dive into the emerging discipline of AI policy evaluation, importing techniques from causal inference to treat model iterations like randomized control trials ++. Stella and Eddie explain why generic vendor metrics often lead to generic products and emphasize the necessity of manual data curiosity before rushing to automate feedback loops. We also discuss calibrating LLM judges against human experts, the importance of defining what a product should not do, and how robust evaluation standards will become a critical competitive advantage as regulatory requirements evolve. This was also a guest Q&A in our recent Building AI Applications course, which just wrapped up its final cohort. We'll be releasing a few more guest talks and workshops in the near future, so keep your eyes open. Our flagship course just wrapped up, but we're cooking up something new. If you want to be first to hear about it and help shape what we build, there's a link in the show notes to drop your thoughts. Stella has also just started teaching a cohort of her AI Evals and Analytics Playbook course. Starting this week, she's kindly giving listeners of Vanishing Gradients 30% off. I'll be taking it, so I hope to see you there. Links in the show notes. We also live stream many of our podcasts and free workshops. We would love you to join. Check out the Luma calendar and subscribe to our Substack newsletter and YouTube channel. All links are in the show notes. If you enjoy the show, the best way to support it is to share this episode with a friend or colleague who you think would get something out of it. I'm Hugo Bown-Anderson, and welcome to Vanishing Gradients. Stella and Eddie, what is up?
Hey.
Yeah, excited to be here.
Yeah,
Great.
thanks for having us.
Long-time listener.
Yeah, Eddie, you came and gave a guest talk last April in the course on building memory into AI systems, and what was essentially seems now early ways of thinking about using agents to encode memory in AI systems, right?
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, the last company I worked on prior to my current work, which is more focused on the research and open source software side, was very much focused on long-term memory systems for consumers and consumer data ownership. And this was in a time before ChatGPT really had long-term memory. And like many great business ideas, the foundational labs introduce a feature and it becomes hard to differentiate. But I certainly learned a tremendous amount from the experience.
Yeah, and it's a good question how well memory operates in frontier lab products.
Yeah, I certainly have opinions.
Well.
I certainly have opinions about that. That's probably not the topic.
Yeah,
we'll see if it comes up in the Q&A. But yeah,
exactly. But Eddie's already talked about a few of the things he thinks about. Eddie was at Stitch Fix some time ago, so worked with Stefan. He now has founded CMO. Is that how you pronounce it? CMO Labs?
CMO Labs, yeah.
Really thinking about causal inference in evaluation, among other things. And Stella is... So you were at Shopify some time ago. Is that correct?
Yep.
And you've done a bunch of things since then. But one thing is you have a Maven course on evals, which starts next month.
Yep. Our next cohort starts next month on the 20th, and the course is AI Evals and Analytics Playbook, where
Fantastic.
we teach the best practice in AI evals and also how to connect it with real world business impact.
Yeah, and so that's something I want to get to at some point, thinking through how we really connect these things to real world business impact. And on top of that, you're head of AI applied science at ASU.
Yep.
Yeah.
Yeah, people, when they hear my title, they often assume that this is a pure research role, but actually it's a very product development focused role. So we build AI platform here at Arizona State University, and we're also building a platform solution for AI evaluations.
Awesome. So I'm excited to hear all about all of that. I've given you both kind of context where we're at in the course, but I'll just, so everyone knows where level's set. We had a workshop yesterday on evaluation, something which permeates the course, but really what we went through is how a lot of the time you start with vibes, then you really need to look at your data and do all types of error analysis, categorize your failure modes, and then start building out automated evaluation, whether that be using code checks and unit tests and even regular expression, string matching, testing for JSON, whatever it may be, or when needed, which often isn't needed, LLM judges. And today, actually, Natalia, one of our builders in residence, and Ines and Matt and Magda from Spacey and Explosion AI ran a workshop on essentially data annotation for evaluation, among other things. So we've really gone deep into those things. But I would like to start more broadly. We've talked about this a bunch in the course, but I used to spend a lot of time thinking about and working on AI evaluation. And so I'm just wondering, why do we need AI evals? Why are they important?
Who's going to go first?
What? You talked first, so go for it.
Yeah, so there are a lot of reasons why we should do AI evals. For many companies, doing AI evals is the way to build the feedback loop into the product development lifecycle. So it's like your compass. We're using AI evals as a compass to guide product development and also product iteration. And also many times we need evals to function as the pass or fail gate in release decisions, whether this product is good enough for release or whether it is good enough for experiment. Evals are also used in that. And in some of the regulated industries, for example, like education, the industry I'm in, evaluations are very important for us because we're also using it to check whether we're compliant with regulations.
Super interesting. And that's something that hopefully we'll get into, because this is something you teach in your course as well, how you can use evaluation and guardrails to be compliant. I'm wondering, Eddie, what you'd add to this or any other takes that are important to you.
Yeah, maybe I just describe kind of two categories of motivations. So the first is whenever you're building a system, presumably the company exists for a reason, right? They have some objective that they're trying to optimize. And in terms of making progress toward that objective, it's extremely helpful to be able to have some kind of quantitative measure to compare different decisions you're considering, whether those are different prompts or different models or so on. And in order to make progress towards that objective, evaluation is very useful for guiding those efforts. The second one that I would mention as related but separate is basically the motivation not to embarrass yourself. I think it's, especially with LLMs, there are a lot of kind of failure modes that could be very harmful to the user experience, but are actually fairly low effort to detect and evaluate and avoid for kind of high stakes decisions or making a release to actual users.
Not to embarrass ourselves and also build trust with users and clients.
Building trust and building trust between yourself and the system as well, right?
Yep.
Stella, who should be doing AI evaluation?
Yeah, that is a great question. I think in some teams, we're seeing that the product managers are the only ones doing AI evals, but I firmly believe that AI evals is a team sport. So it's not just the PM, but also with data scientists and also with UX designers and also SMEs, subject matter experts, that can be very important. Their role can be very critical in doing effective AI evals.
And can I ask you, in this set of product managers, because we touched on this last time we spoke, like I work mostly with technical builders, right? Like data, ML, engineers. And I'm wondering, like, AI product managers, are they for the most part somewhat or pretty technical?
Yes, I think they are very, the AI PMs I worked with are very technical, but I say that AI evals should be a team sports rather than one person job, not because they're not technical or not technical enough, but because AI evals is actually the scope of it can get pretty large, and I think it exceeds one person's capability.
Oh, yeah. And I do think SMEs, subject matter experts, and non-technical subject matter experts who have the domain expertise should be able to do AI evals. I just don't know how a non-technical PM would even go about doing them at the moment with the tools and technologies and the way these systems are set up. But do you find they mostly use like vendor tools for evals, or how?
Not necessarily. I think I would say AI evals is still a very new field, is still a very new domain. And people who are doing AI evals, they are, I would say in many cases, early adopters. And it would be a hard sell if you just started doing something and you want to buy a vendor solution. So I would say most of the people that I've worked with, where I've talked to, they started without vendor solutions.
And how about you, Eddie? Who do you think should be doing evals?
Everyone.
Yeah.
I think, yeah, to be able to provide more helpful detail, I think it's so dependent on like the stage and maturity of a given project. I totally agree that it's a team sport. And I think that with any kind of like nascent technology and business process, it's good to just experiment and bring different perspectives to the table. But I think that if you're you're maybe just standing up a demo, or you're still very early stage, right? I think that probably the person that's best suited to thinking about evaluation, whether you want to invest in a structured evaluation at all kind of upfront, I think, again, it depends on the trade-offs of your domain, if it's a health domain, or there's some domains that are more sensitive than others. But I think that the kind of important characteristics are like, someone who has really good intuition for the product, has really strong kind of empathy for the user. I think that once you move along like the maturity and scale axis, it starts to look a little bit more like a data science problem. I think that, data scientists for a long time, data science, it's like a multidisciplinary area. And so I think that kind of as this matures, we realize more and more, and a lot of what my work is about bringing kind of statistics and causal inference to AI evaluation, is that as this kind of field matures, we realize that, hey, this is just policy evaluation. This is something that we've been doing for hundreds of years, and A/B testing is fundamentally the same problem. And when I've talked to friends at, for example, OpenAI, what they're really thinking about is like, how do we build our evaluations in such a way that they correlate well, they predict what our A/B tests are going to say. So I would say that maybe just like to summarize the points I'm making here is I wouldn't be too precious about, especially starting out, who should be involved. I think anyone who has an opinion is a good person to involve. But I do think that as you build kind of scale and sophistication, it starts to look a little bit more like a data science problem. And so I think subject matter experts still play a role in that, but I think it starts to converge to that kind of data science wheelhouse.
If I can add to what Eddie just said, I think it depends. For, say, startup companies, if they're not in the heavily regulated industries, and if they're in the first iteration of their product development, then yes, they can probably just build it and ship it without doing much evaluations, because after all, there's not much to lose. But as you iterate with your product, as you build your use base, you want to maintain that trust building exercise with your users and with your clients. And that is when you care more about the quality of the software or of the application that you are delivering. And at that point, evaluation will become more important, and you will naturally get more resource and also more people involved in your AI evaluations project.
Yeah, great.
What do you think, Hugo? Yeah, I feel like you have good perspectives on all these questions.
I think my first answer is...
You weren't expecting me to...
No. I had several follow-up questions. I love this.
Okay, yeah. I don't mean to interrupt. Yeah, do your thing, man.
Firstly, someone who's got the right incentives should be responsible.
I like that.
It should be your job to make sure this product works. So a PM is a wonderful person for that. If it doesn't work enough times, you should lose your job, or get another job in the same place. Or I think making sure that there are like benefits and costs in any organization. That's how we set up organizations. And I don't mean to be too Jeff Bezos-y about these things or Taylorist, but the people who care and the people who have the domain expertise as well. I do think there's a challenge with product in general. There's this whole thing like a PM is like the CEO of the product or something. And the truth is that's not true. I mean, PMs have soft power, and engineers are notoriously challenging to wrangle in a way that a CEO may not have challenges with, right? But I do think the people who care, the people who have the incentives, the right incentives, and the people who have the domain expertise. Now, these may be different people as well in a variety of ways. And that kind of segues into what I wanted to ask you. How do you, when doing evals, let me actually give you an example. Last year, there was someone in the course who they were building out a product at an early stage startup, and the CEO and the CTO were both annotating, giving evaluations of outputs and giving different responses. And he was like, they have very different opinions. And I was like, my response was, this actually has nothing to do with evals. You're just seeing it come out in evals. What you're seeing is co-founder disagreement and tension emerge in an AI product, which is fascinating. But Schreier and Hamill talk about having a benevolent dictator for evals, like someone who's the final say on things. I'm wondering how you think about reconciling differences of opinion when doing evaluation.
So from my experience, I actually do not see a lot of, say, disagreements when it comes to the detailed implementation of AI evals. The more common pattern I've seen is that there is no, how do I put it, no clear definition of the scope of the AI evals, or no clear definition of the expectation of the product. Or in other words, the product requirements document these days are often missing because we are all prototyping and we just move from prototyping to building a solution in production. But a lot of the discussions around what is exactly this product or this application is designed to do, and also more importantly, what is designed not to do. Those discussions are often happening, I would say, much later in the process, where, in my opinion, they should have happened sooner in the product development.
I love it. And I think, actually, to your point, having a PID, of course, interpretations, we can think we agree on things, and then when details come out, we may not. But having that form of alignment, as I said, the challenge in this situation was downstream of other challenges, I think. So making sure there's as much alignment upstream. Wondering your thoughts, Eddie. I'll just say Carol Willing just put in the chat. Love that Eddie asked Hugo on the spot as well. So keep it coming.
Got to keep the host honest.
Oh, seriously. Yeah.
So yeah, I agree with, fortunately, the three of us, I think, are probably in agreement on most things, though maybe we'll throw in some curveballs or diversity to keep things interesting. So on this question, yeah, I totally agree with the framing of, hey, it's fundamentally, that's not an eval problem. That's like two people in a business kind of disagreeing problem. I think there are a number of ways to resolve this. I think it's worth asking, okay, if you have a benevolent dictator, is there any reason, should they like update their perspective from observing someone else who's well-informed that disagrees with them? That might suggest taking an average of the two. And so I think that it depends on the context. I do think that, yeah, at the end of the day, like decisions need to be made. That's the reason like hierarchy exists in most organizations. So I agree that at the end of the day, there has to be a decider, but I do think that if you have human annotators that disagree, maybe the kind of starting point is not necessarily assuming that one person is right and one person is wrong.
Yeah. I want to, again, add to what Eddie just said. Like whenever Eddie talks, I just have more thoughts to add to that. This is also what we shared in our AI Evals and Analytics Playbook course. It is very important for large scale AI products or AI projects, it's important to identify the roles you need on the AI Evals team early on. To do that is also help us to understand who owns what decisions, and that will help reconcile some of those disagreements.
Amazing. And I love that that's what the types of things you cover in your course as well, because we very much focus, we have these conversations, but we very much focus on the building side of things and the building side of evaluation as well. I do want to say something I'm hearing in here as well is finding the best answer that you can, given the information you have, and ideally making sure everyone's on board with that. I'm gonna link to this book called $1 Trillion Coach. I don't know if anyone's heard of Bill Campbell. He was a football coach, I think, and football player who then became a mentor to Steve Jobs, Larry Page, Eric Schmidt, Mark Zuckerberg. That's why this book's called, and the book's by Eric Schmidt and a bunch of those dudes. But the one thing Bill Campbell always made sure any CEO or any person in leadership position knew their job was to get the best idea and solution out of everyone, and then get everyone essentially to disagree and commit, and make sure everyone understands why this decision's being made as well. And I do think we said these things are upstream of evaluation, but evaluation is the business problem as well, right?
Yes.
Or there's a really important mapping there. So we could talk about this for now. We are here to talk about...
Yeah, sorry to interrupt. But yeah, it's where I think what's so interesting about it is it's where these kind of like fuzzy kind of organizational dynamics and objectives have to be represented numerically. And so it's the boundary where you're faced with, if you're inconsistent, this is potentially the first place it's really going to show up.
So you've provoked another thought. Do evals need to be quantitative or can they be qualitative? You need to make a decision, but...
Mm-hmm. I think it's both qualitative and quantitative. And that is why I think most AI evals start from qualitative evaluations. So from that qualitative evaluation phase, we try to identify like which parts are deterministic and which parts are, say, automatable, and we may find some parts that are unquantifiable, and those will remain as qualitative reviews. We definitely want to automate as much as we can. We want to quantify as much as we can, but for some applications, for some AI applications, there will be parts that cannot be quantifiable.
I also... Eddie, you mentioned A/B testing when you were talking about OpenAI, and I actually wanted to clarify something, and perhaps I should have done this earlier. There were all these like eval wars in September or whatever, like August, September on the platform formerly known as Twitter. And a lot of people were like, oh, we don't do evals, we only do online A/B tests. And most people I work with and know consider all of this being part of AI evals. But is that the definition you use, or do you think more of offline evaluation? Or
I personally think of like whether it's you want to measure kind of the safety and efficacy of a new drug and run a randomized controlled trial, or you're testing the red button versus the green button, or you're testing prompt A versus prompt B. Those are all fundamentally the same problem. Those are all policy evaluation problems. You're trying to figure out, quantify what's the difference between the control, variant A and variant B. And so in terms of when someone says AI evaluation, I think that kind of online and offline evaluation are both consistent with one another. They're two sides of the same coin. In terms of what people use just in common parlance, I think typically when people say AI evaluation, they're referring to the offline version. But I do think that in some respects, that's a shame because I think one of the failure modes I see a lot is just like thinking about AI evals as like just unit tests. And A/B tests are something completely different. I think that kind of creates confusion and leads to optimizing a proxy metric in the offline evals that doesn't necessarily correspond to business impact.
Yeah. And again, I think we can acknowledge that AI evals is still a loosely defined term, and we may all have our own version of the definition for it. But I definitely think that offline evals, online evals, and also the experiments all are needed in order to build a successful AI product. But again, like if you're an early stage startup, then you may not need to do some of it. You may just go with the pilot or go with the experiment. But in practice, for most companies, for established companies, for enterprise, you want to do offline evals before running A/B testing or running experiments because the experiments can be expensive. And you want to reach a certain confidence level before you start doing A/B testing or doing experimentation. And also, again, I firmly believe that AI evals is also a tool that we should use to guide our product development. So in that sense, yes, I think doing offline evals are also very important. The way I see the two is offline evals is we are using this tool, this AI evals tool, to measure the product against our expectation. It's like before it meets real user, I think as the product owner or the product team, I think users want the product like this. But that can be different. And in some cases, it can be quite different from what real users need. And I think that is the part that we can get answers from is experimentation.
Awesome.
Yeah, so I certainly agree with that.
Stop agreeing, everyone.
Sorry.
Challenge me, Eddie.
I think it's your fault for
inviting you. Exactly.
Inviting us.
Yeah.
Like inviting two people with so much,
I've created an echo chamber.
Such correlated views. Yeah. I think I totally agree that, and I like the way you framed framing I haven't really heard is thinking about offline evaluation as what are your kind of, as the product owner, what are your expectations and trying to like measure against that. And I will say that that's only useful insofar as that actually corresponds to what your users care about. So you're making a big assumption there. That said, and I think this is a big part of why something like error analysis is so incredibly high impact, is that if your JSON is breaking, if you have obvious failure modes in your data, right, you understand in a very clear way that is not consistent with what you'd expect of a good product. And you can make a pretty safe assumption that your users are going to feel the exact same way. When it comes to something more fuzzy or maybe a little more qualitative in nature, like the level of kindness or helpfulness or the tone of voice, that becomes harder just to assert what users are going to actually care about.
And I have an example. Maybe it's a quite tricky situation. For example, like hallucination rate in writing tools. Is hallucination good or bad for writing tools? It's actually hard to tell. I assume like users, if I were a user of a writing tool, an AI-powered writing tool, I wanted to hallucinate to some degree, right? I don't want the writing to be deterministic.
So I totally agree. I also think non-determinism can be a superpower in a lot of places. Deep research is one example, right? And people may have heard me say this before, but if I have a whole bunch of research assistants working on the same project, I don't want them to come back with exactly the same information and reports. I do think hallucination is an interesting question there because I'm like Karpathy's take. If we're not doing retrieval or not grounding in any way, his take is that every LLM hallucinates 100% of the time. And just sometimes it coincides with ground truth. Whereas search is 100% non-hallucination, pure search, where you're bringing back retrieved chunks. And then what happens in the middle is really the interesting part.
Yeah. It's generative AI, right?
Well, exactly. Yeah. I did want to ask you what the biggest mistakes you see people making with AI evals at the moment are, but I'd like to frame it in a bit more of a fun way, I think. I'm wondering, how would you advise someone at the moment to build like a terrible evaluation system?
I can go first.
Go for it.
Just use a vendor tool or just use any open source AI evals package and use the built-in metrics to evaluate your AI product. You're good.
Fantastic.
Yeah, I would say, just to add to that, anything, basically standing up evals without actually looking at your data. I think that is probably the biggest, hypothesizing what matters without actually looking at kind of the interactions that users are having with your system.
And do you see that happening quite a bit?
Unfortunately, yes.
Yeah. I see it less. I have told people in the course this, but when I really try to encourage people to look at their data, still 50% of the time they say, can I get an agent to do that? And the question itself, one big concern there, it isn't that they may not look at it. It's that I wonder why they're building the product if they don't have the curiosity. Of course, once people start looking at it, they're like, ooh, that's weird. Oh, that's interesting. Oh, that works, right? So once they're in, go down the rabbit hole, it's tough to get them out.
Yeah, for sure. And when I was, I built a consumer application that grew to a couple thousand weekly active users. And I was just like, whatever data I had access to, I was like pouring over it. And I was always pushing out changes and seeing how that showed up. And I think that if you don't have that kind of drive to understand what's going on, you're not nervous about how the change you made is affecting the behavior of your system, I think that's a real failure mode. And I think that kind of feedback loop of looking at your data and building up kind of your mental model of how are people using this, where are kind of the weak points, is just absolutely essential to climbing a hill towards a product that people actually want to use.
Yeah.
Totally.
And also going back to what Hugo just mentioned, people trying to automate AI evals or use agent to do the work for them. I actually think one of the most important part of AI evals is to understand what can be automated and what cannot be automated. And again, if AI evals can be fully automated, or can be fully automated by AI, then we shouldn't have an AI evals problem in the first place.
Yeah.
And we should just have completely self-optimizing systems. If they can figure out the objectives and how to measure it, great. Maybe fortunately we're not there yet, so we still have jobs. And
Yep.
Also, I can't imagine that they won't be better than us at gaming metrics as well in the end.
Yes.
Right?
Go hard slog.
Yeah, exactly. And we see this with all types of reinforcement learning as well, where they learn all types of wacky things. The other thing, to your point earlier, Stella, about having a good PID, the other failure mode I see is just not having a PID or specifications, or people like, hey, let's build a retrieval system over everything we have, all our docs and wikis, and then, let's make it agentic and multi-hop, and then it gets sunset 18 months later because they haven't been able to measure impact because they didn't even have a goal.
Yeah, and it's not just the small teams are making this type of mistakes. Like teams at big tech companies are also making similar mistakes. I think one recent example I saw was Amazon's Rufus AI chatbot. So actually in our course, we mentioned in the first session that when you design your AI evals, you need to understand what is the design capability, but you also want to understand what are the constraints. But with this Rufus bot, it answers any questions from users. So some people are using it like ChatGPT or Claude for answering questions that are not related to Amazon or to their orders at all. And I'm sure Amazon can afford a bill, but it's definitely not the ideal design.
Yeah, people have called it free GPT. And actually, I think it was that one I saw someone recently was getting to write code for them. I am interested, something we've been talking around is the use of statistics. And I'm wondering what people need to know about statistics to do AI evals at the moment.
I think
I can start this time. You've had to start every time. Yeah, it goes back to an initial kind of caveat idea of just around thinking about like the spectrum of maturity. And I think in the early phases of evaluation, I think it's useful to have this framing of, hey, what's the thing you're actually trying to measure? What's the ground truth that your evaluation system is actually trying to approximate? So I think that's just like a general problem framing thing. It's certainly grounded in statistics, but you don't need to be a statistician to apply that to your thought process. As maturity and scale grows, right, when you run an A/B test, typically you run it for some period of time so you can measure the difference with some level of precision. You can confidently say, hey, this isn't just noise. Actually, variant B is better than variant A. And so I think that there's no reason that idea shouldn't be applied to offline evaluation. But I do think that requires a certain scale to really have the resources to such that kind of the difference between applying that approach and not applying that approach makes a huge difference. That said, I will say that like having that kind of just like the mental model of even in earlier stages, having the mental model of, hey, we're trying to approximate some distribution of kind of the distribution you care about is all your users and all the tasks that they're going to perform. And so your evaluation is trying to approximate like the performance over that. And then also being aware that, hey, if we only have 3 examples, that's going to be pretty noisy. That doesn't mean there's no information, but it's worth at least having an awareness that you're measuring a system with randomness. And so just having the appropriate kind of framing there.
Stella.
I think for the experimentation part of AI evals, it's just like any experiments that we have done in the past. Statistics plays a vital role in designing experiments and also analyzing experiment outputs or results. And for the offline evals, statistics, I wouldn't say it's like rocket science statistics, but a good understanding of non-deterministic will be very important in building good offline AI evals. So for example, one thing that I found that is very challenging for people from, say, non-data background is to understand that AI evals is different from, say, pass or fail. It's not a simple pass or fail. It's more similar to, again, like doing data science. If you have a distribution and if you get a confidence level, how do you make decisions from there? So I think the mental model, again, going back to what Addie said, like having the mental model and have a good understanding of the non-deterministic nature of AI really helps us to do AI evals, to do offline AI evals, and also the experiments. And also in doing offline evals, one big challenge in doing offline evals is to build good test sets. And building a good test sets, again, that goes back to understanding the distribution of your real user interactions and map that to your offline evaluation test set. And I think that's where we need statistics in AI evals.
Yeah, I totally agree. And I hear it like this level of maturity. We need some sort of relatively sophisticated statistical thinking. If you're doing NHST, like null hypothesis tests and power analysis in order to design experiments, that isn't, on the surface, it may seem straightforward, but that actually isn't straightforward at all. Basic science research isn't a reproducibility crisis, actually, because it isn't necessarily straightforward. And Fisherian stats is done horribly. That's why
It's hard to know. You don't know the counterfactual, right? It's like I criticize, but I don't know.
No, I do know the counterfactual. Know the counterfactual. I've seen it done correctly, and I've seen it done poorly. Having worked in biology labs where people who've published in Nature and Science and Cell with n is equal to 3, a sample size of 3, and making like serious claims about that, I have the counterfactual for that, definitely.
No, you don't. You can only observe one version of the universe. Counterfactual would be like, okay, if you replaced frequent statistics in all of science with, I don't know what you would suggest, Bayesian statistics or other.
We can, this is something I can disagree on. I think you're doing some sort of,
let's lean into it.
Saying this done correctly, right? And you're right, I don't have the same universe with this only thing changed, but I've seen enough of it done correctly that that it does look horrible here. So I actually have enough evidence to say what the counterfactual of this person doing it with a sample size of 15 would look like, if that makes sense. Yeah.
It just reminds me of a joke that I heard from a professor friend. He said, never collaborate with a statistician because they question every conclusion that you...
Totally.
Yeah, but so Hugo, go ahead.
I was just going to say, I do think, like I do say, I joke I'm probably a Bayesian. I do think that one pro of Bayesian methods in statistics, it makes you be explicit about your assumptions. There are always assumptions underlying, like if you're doing a p-test versus whatever, a chi-squared test, there are assumptions underlying whatever happens there. And it may be an assumption of normality in a distribution, which just doesn't exist. Whereas Bayesian stats are, you have to make your assumptions explicit.
Yeah, and also going back to our disagreement, because I'm not sure if we did disagree, maybe I was just misunderstanding you. I guess the point you were making is that, hey, when people do statistics right, this works pretty well when people are really thoughtful about it. But when they do it naively and like it's performing Goodhart's law, right? They just optimize for p-values. You end up with results that are very divergent from kind of the objectives of science. I certainly don't disagree with that. Yeah.
I am interested, Eddie, in how you're thinking about the future of evaluation with people incorporating more causal inference into it. So maybe you could tell us a bit of your work on causal inference in AI evaluation at the moment.
Yeah, for sure. And if I was a better self-promoter, I would have taken the statistics question as a good opportunity to plug my own work.
That's what I'm here for.
A lot of what I've been focused on really does require, at least in terms of kind of building the software and setting up, right? It's when you calculate confidence intervals after running an A/B test, you don't need to know necessarily all the nuts and bolts. You just plug it in, you get your p-value, you have a high level understanding. Basically, I've been focused on that problem for calibrating LLM judges to human experts or some kind of whatever. At some point, you have to define a ground truth label. And typically, your ground truth high quality label is something that's very expensive. And so you can't afford very many of them. LLM-as-a-judge is a new measurement primitive that's very inexpensive. You can get to label anything, but the judge isn't necessarily aligned with your human experts or kind of the objective that you care about. And where kind of statistics plays and causal inference plays a very vital role is really focusing on this problem of making sure you're not just trying to make a score go up that doesn't actually correspond with the outcome that you care about. And so the causal inference framing is saying, hey, here's the thing that you care about. Here's like the counterfactual that you're comparing. So the universe under prompt A and the universe under system prompt B. So that's the causal framing component. And then if we're going to do this and we're going to compare these two variants, how do we quantify that uncertainty? How do we understand how much noise there is in kind of that comparison versus like signal to actually differentiate the two and to pick a winner? And then there's the further question of how many labels do you need, right? So there's a kind of power analysis component of this where you're collecting some number of examples, and then of those total number of examples, some subset of those are going to be labeled by human experts. And so basically you want to do that in the most efficient way possible. And basically that is a solvable problem. It requires some statistics, but it can really, the return on investment could be quite high in terms of using your information in kind of the most efficient way. So yeah, when I think about the future and this field maturing, I really do have a lot of confidence that it's gonna look a lot more like some of the more kind of established statistical and kind of causal inference practices that have been established elsewhere. So it's very early days, but yeah, it's a growing area, and I've been encouraged and heartened by the adoption I've seen just in my own work and the open source software tooling. So there definitely is a real audience, especially in the data science crowd. But I think it is still early days, and most teams aren't even doing error analysis properly, right? So I think it's important just to be thoughtful about what's impactful for your team at your stage of development. But I do think that at scale and at maturity, it starts to look a lot more like kind of a causal inference and statistics problem.
Awesome. And I've actually linked to your CJAE causal judge evaluation package in the Discord. And congrats on recently past 10K downloads on PyPI as well.
Yeah, thank you.
This is another thing that I think in the end we'll agree on, but I do want to provoke.
Oh no! Let's go.
Yeah.
I'll try not to convince you that we actually agree.
Yeah. No, we do agree on this. Outside a handful of companies that essentially have two-sided marketplaces and need to hire economists who are great at causal inference. And I'm actually talking about Amazon, Uber, and a couple of others. Actually, data science, let alone AI, has never done causal inference well.
So that's your assertion that...
Yeah, that's my... Yeah. And I'd actually love to see more causal inference and stuff from economics brought into data science. Like even, and this is a hill I get on, but definitely wouldn't die on.
Yeah.
Too many people think that when you do an A/B test, you're studying your system at equilibrium, right? As opposed to having to wait and see what the results are after relaxation, for example. Yeah, so I'm wondering about your thoughts of where's causal inference in data science, and then how do we import it into there and AI now?
Yeah, so I think the main kind of success case for causal inference in data science is just A/B testing. And I think that the field has reached like a pretty solid level of maturity just in terms of thinking about multiple comparisons. Like a rank and file data scientist, I think is someone who knows how to power an A/B test and kind of run that effectively. And so I think going beyond that and thinking about more complicated kind of bespoke situations where it's an observational setup or you have some randomization somewhere. Maybe the randomization isn't at the user level, it's at varying something over time or by geography. I find that, and first of all, I think a lot of people don't really understand like the definition of causal inference. Even people that are like, I've met economists at big tech companies that like are staff data scientists that like, I talk about causal judge evaluation and like they really struggle to see that as a causal inference problem.
So I do see it as a problem. I think maybe we just have a difference of definition. I don't think
Yeah.
A/B test, like it is causal inference 101, but if you're not thinking about confounders and admitted variable bias and instrumental variables, I would say you're not yet really doing causal inference. So
Okay. I think that we have different definitions. I think that whenever you're making a decision, whenever what you're trying to measure depends on this idea of kind of parallel universes and what you would observe in these parallel universes, basically this counterfactual framing, you're in a domain in which you can only observe one of these things. And so the whole kind of definition, the kind of formal definition of causal inference is often framed as a missing data problem, where you're basically trying to use causal identification to infer the counterfactual, the kind of universe that you weren't able to observe, because you can only observe one universe in kind of reality. And so in terms of like causal judge evaluation and AI evaluation writ large, it's very clear that like what you care about measuring is like, hey, if I were God and I could like play out all these different universes associated with kind of all the kind of prompts and models and kind of system configurations that I have, all the ideas that I have, I would pick the thing that has the best performance, that generates the most revenue for the company in the long run. And so anyway, that's
I would say,
go
ahead. We probably shouldn't go too deep into this because we've got 5 minutes left, but something inherent in causal inference and A/B testing is a statement that's put to the side, everything else held constant, right? And inherent in that statement is thinking about confounders. And when I see A/B tests done mostly in data science, it isn't done robustly in terms of that particular segment being considered too deeply. But I do agree that A/B testing done correctly is the first part of causal inference.
Yeah, I want to add to that. So I come from a statistics background. And so one of my first lessons when entering industry is people are doing A/B testing or experimentations very differently from what I learned at school. And if we hold it to if in a way that we can say that almost all experiments or A/B testings done in industry, especially tech industry, are wrong, but they can still be useful in some cases.
So interestingly, Carol Willing has put in the chat, she has training in economics, and she said her old MIT professor used to say, I can prove anything with data. It doesn't mean it has any value.
Oh, yeah. So there's a professor at Harvard. His name is Donald Rubin, one of the founding fathers in causal inference. And he said something similar. He said, every experiment outside this campus is done wrong.
Yeah. And this also comes back to what Hugo was talking about before, of just like, there are all these assumptions that go into the methodology that you're using. And most people aren't aware of all those assumptions. And so I think of causal inference as actually causal inference is about what assumptions are you making about your ability to estimate the kind of the universes that you can actually see. So it's really causal inference in its essence is about what assumptions do you need to feel confident that when you collect data, as you collect more data, you're actually going to converge to the kind of missing estimate that you care about.
Awesome. So I am wondering, 12 months from now, okay, March 2020, what year will it be? 2027. I really had to think that through. This isn't a question of prediction, but I'm asking, what would you like to see best practices in the eval space look like in 12 months?
Go ahead, Stella, because I've been talking a lot. Go ahead.
So myself as an AI evals practitioner, I would love to see more industry standards set on AI evals.
And what type of standards do you think, if you could only choose a couple?
So I'll give an example. Although I live in the US and we at the federal level, we're deregulate AI. But still, if you look at company or even the federal government procurement process, they're asking for evaluations for AI solution procurement. But in those guidance, when they mention evaluations, it's still very vague. They say that you need to do evaluations, but what exactly do you mean by evaluations? And similarly, for some of the state level AI acts, there's one from California and there's one from Colorado. Similarly, there are expectations set, which is a great step forward, but still they're at very high level. And it's not clear, for compliance with regulations, what exactly do companies or do AI product team needs to do to meet that expectation?
Amazing. And I love that you're tying this once again to compliance and regulation. I do just want to chat about what you've seen in your course and your offering in a minute. But Eddie, I'd love your thoughts on the future music of AI evals.
Yeah. I think the biggest thing that kind of stands out to me is just like making sure that the things that are evaluated on benchmarks are actually grounded in kind of human values, the things that humans value. And I think that right now we're in a phase that like LLM judges are so convenient that it's just the natural thing to use in kind of every situation without thinking that carefully about how does this map to things that humans care about, the human welfare. And I think that this is fundamentally, as AI proliferates, like a really foundational problem just in terms of aligning AI systems to our values. And I think that benchmarks that claim to be making progress in terms of some kind of occupation or skill should be labeled not just by an LLM judge, they should actually receive the scrutiny of real humans. And we can still use LLM judges, but we should really make sure that they're grounded in something that we trust.
Totally. And we have a bunch of love coming in the Discord chat about the need for humans and human judgment here. And we don't have time too much to dig into all the challenges you've both seen with LLM judges, but you've both written a bunch on them as well. So we'll make sure to drop some links to the class as well. I am, in terms of wrapping up, Stella, maybe you could tell us a bit about your course, because as I said, it does focus on all the technical things and how to build out eval systems, but it seems very much on connecting to different stakeholders and making sure regulatory and compliance stuff are satisfied. So maybe you can tell us a bit about what you cover.
Yeah, sure. I'll keep it short. So if you're interested in getting a comprehensive view on how to do AI evals for your product, not just LLM-as-a-judge, and also if you're building AI solutions for a higher stake use cases, then you may want to check out our course. It's called AI Evals and Analytics Playbook. And we also offer a special discount for Hugo's audience.
Yeah, I've just put the link in the Discord, and Stella's
thank you.
And Amy are offering us. Is your colleague Amy, is it?
Yes.
Yes. Kindly offering everyone 30% off. So really appreciate that. Eddie, I'm wondering, what's one thing you'd really like to see builders do a bit more of?
I think that the best thing you can do is just to like care about your product, look at your data, think for yourself, right? There's a million talking heads out there trying to like create FOMO and make you feel insecure about what you're doing. I would just like really try to approach problems from first principles and think very carefully about what your users care about and really use that as use your human brain and kind of judgment as the most kind of powerful tool that you have.
Awesome. Love it. Thank you, everyone, for joining. Most of all, thanks, Stella and Eddie, for coming and sharing your time and expertise with us all. But see you all on Discord and in the workshop tomorrow. Thanks, everyone. Thanks for tuning in, everybody. And thanks for sticking around until the end of the episode. I would honestly love to hear from you about what resonates with you in the show, what doesn't, and anybody you'd like to hear me speak with, along with topics you'd like to hear more about. The best way to let me know is currently on LinkedIn, and I'll put my profile in the show notes. Thanks once again, and see you in the next episode.